What I miss most about my mom are the holidays. The house was transformed. My biggest challenge with my mom gone is trying to step in her footsteps. Doctors who are not qualified to perform certain procedures, their license should be revoked. Dr. Jacobowitz, I don't have words. I don't have the words to express what your actions has done, the pain and the suffering that it has caused that can never be reversed.
Every day, somewhere in America, more than 300 innocent men, women, and children become victims of medical malpractice at the hands of incompetent and negligent doctors. Last year, over 98,000 victims were killed by doctors. More than 4 million victims are permanently injured each year.
Today, the Insider Exclusive goes behind the headlines in When Doctors Go Wrong, Evangeline Johnson's story. To examine how Marvin Fuhrman, member at Wolf Fuhrman, got justice for Evangeline Johnson and her family in a very challenging wrongful death case caused by a medical doctor. Marvin understands how medical malpractice and serious accidents cause life-changing injuries to innocent people. As a successful trial lawyer, he has built his reputation based on aggressive and creative trial work. He has obtained numerous 6- and 7-figure verdicts and settlements for clients who have been involved in traumatic situations which altered their lives physically, mentally, and financially. And it has earned him the highest respect from citizens and lawyers alike as one of the best trial lawyers in New York and in America. He has seen many innocent and hardworking people injured and killed by negligent and incompetent doctors, hospitals, and nurses. Marvin's passion is problem solving. He approaches each medical negligence case as a scientist and as a lawyer, trying to solve a puzzle. And because he has seen many patients suffer needless injury, he makes it his dedicated mission to get legitimate and truthful answers to what really happened to his clients in each case. And through the American judicial process, he gets answers to these tough questions, which result in hospitals and doctors being more responsible to patients and society. These successes drive him to help more people who have been harmed by medical malpractice. His goal? To make medicine safer and more accountable, and of course, to get the justice his clients deserve. This is the Insider Exclusive, live from New York.
It is my great pleasure to introduce Marvin Fuhrman to the show. Welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Tell our audience a little bit about your practice here. What type of law do you and your partner generally practice?
Well, my partner and I have been practicing here up in the South Bronx for about the last 6 years. We have a general personal injury practice, but our real specialty and I think our real passion is medical malpractice, because there's such complex cases and there are so many defenses and roadblocks that can be placed in a patient's way after they've been catastrophically injured from a medical error, that there's very few places they can go to really seek justice.
Well, today we are here because of such a case.
Right.
And it's the case of Evangeline Johnson.
Right.
And would you tell our audience a little bit about who Evangeline was?
Sure. Before that, I'd actually just finished a case against a cardiothoracic surgeon in Brooklyn. And I was approached by the New York Post, and they did an article about this case. It was also a horrendous case involving mitral valve surgery that had settled for close to $9 million. The Johnson family, Evangeline had 4 children. They contacted me, and they said, you know, our mother just died after surgery from the same doctor. Would you look into it for us? And that's how I got involved.
And
Tell a little bit about Evangeline had 4 children.
Yes.
And what the facts of this case were.
Right. Well, Evangeline went for mitral valve surgery originally at a local hospital in Brooklyn. And the surgery had been scheduled by this surgeon on 3 separate occasions, and every time it would get for unexplained reasons, the surgery would be canceled.
Yeah.
And then on a Saturday night, of all times, the surgeon came walking into her Evangeline's hospital room and said, I'm going to transfer you to another hospital, and we're going to do the surgery at the other hospital without any explanation.
Why had it been canceled? That's important.
It's very important because the doctor wasn't qualified to do the procedure he wanted to do. He wanted to perform surgery using a new technology at the time called heart port,
Right.
where they used a balloon instead of a clamp to cross-clamp the aorta. And at that particular hospital, you were not allowed to perform surgery using that new technology unless you were supervised by a more experienced doctor. And this surgeon, because surgeons have incredible egos, just wouldn't do it.
Right.
And he kept trying to schedule the surgery. And they actually had to call, I mean, this is what we developed during the case, which is really incredible. They had to call the chairman of the Department of Surgery, who was at a conference in Colorado, and this is in Brooklyn now, and say, you know, this doctor wants to do this surgery, to use this heart port method, you know, he's not allowed to do it. And the chairman said, absolutely not. Do not allow this to happen in my hospital. So he transferred her. Now, none of this was told to the family. And of course, the surgery went downhill from there. The surgery was performed in another hospital where this doctor was the chief of the cardiothoracic unit. He was later disciplined and dismissed from that position for other reasons, for a high mortality
So he
rate.
knew he wasn't competent enough. He had been told this by people who were far more experienced.
He was told that if he wanted to perform it, you're right, he was told if he wanted to perform it, he needed to do it under the supervision of a more experienced surgeon, and he refused. And as a result, the patient died. And the family was deprived of really the center of that family. I mean, if you speak to the children, they'll tell you Evangeline kept that family together, and the consequences of her death have just rippled throughout the family, even to this day.
After you gathered all the facts, you decided to file suit against the same doctor. What were some of the legal challenges and the issues that you had to confront?
Right. Well, it really, this case really showed some of the limitations in bringing a doctor like this to justice, because the law really didn't allow us to educate the jury that he wasn't allowed to perform the surgery unless he was supervised by a more experienced surgeon. The jury never heard that. I mean, we were successful.
Why didn't they hear it?
Because the law in New York State on informed consent, what a patient, the information a patient should be given before giving their consent, an informed consent to a surgery, is very limited. It's limited to risks and complications and benefits. It's not limited to credentialing. Now, every doctor will tell you that the medical literature is replete with studies that say the more you perform a procedure, the more competent you will be, and your mortality and morbidity rate, the injury and death rate, will go down drastically.
Yeah.
Now, here's a surgeon who had never done this and was being told by his own hospital, you need to be supervised. Yet the law in New York State does not require a doctor to tell you his credentials, that I've not done this procedure before, that my hospital says this is experimental.
Right. Only that type of operation, here's a risk, right?
Right.
And I understand the risk at that time was 300% greater than any other type of operation similar to that,
It
correct?
was determined that by using this balloon, they would thread a long tube through your groin into your heart and inflate a balloon inside your ascending aorta instead of putting a clamp.
Yeah. Now, is that the law in New York right now?
Yes,
in terms
it still
of
is.
you cannot bring the credentials of the doctor into play, showing that he's qualified or not qualified for doing
As
it.
long as he's licensed in that field, no, you can't. The doctor is not, the way to say it is the doctor is not under an obligation to tell you, I've never done the procedure, or I have, for instance, a high morbidity and mortality rate. You know, the literature in this case, the heart port, they said the first 25 cases were such a steep learning curve that most people in their first 25 cases had 2 deaths. I mean, wouldn't you want to know that before undergoing that procedure? And there was, the sad thing was there was no reason he couldn't have used the traditional clamp across the aorta.
Right.
This was really the doctor's own ego getting in the way, his own desire to advance his medical learning but using Evangeline Johnson as a guinea pig.
Yeah,
And
who died.
Who died. Died
Yeah.
5 days later. Died from a massive injury to her brain. When they took a CAT scan, they couldn't even differentiate the white and gray matter. That's how intense the injury was, because the balloon they were using migrated. It moved. It didn't stay in place, which is why it's not used anymore. It's only a short period of time they even tried this. And you mentioned the 300%. It was found by the people who were using this balloon a lot that it was increasing injury more than 300%, so it was stopped.
Yeah.
You know, but the balloon moved, and it ended up blocking off the arch vessels on the top of the aorta that feed your blood into your brain. So she was deprived of all oxygen and all blood to her brain. She never woke up after the surgery, which was another frustrating part of the case, the law on pain and suffering and damages. I mean, here was a woman, she was a vibrant woman. In the hospital, they talked about how she was walking and alert, and her family was coming to visit her. She had a lot of life left in her. But because she never woke up from the surgery, and because it was difficult to prove conscious pain and suffering, the law actually cuts your damages. I mean, what about the value of a human being? In New York State, you can't go to a jury and say, this doctor performed an experiment on this lady and killed her. Her life has a value.
Sure. What was the end result of this case?
Well, the end result, was satisfying in the fact that the jury did find that the doctor had not provided appropriate information to the family, had not explained what heart port was, despite us not being able to explain why she was transferred on a Saturday night. And they did find that he committed malpractice, that he improperly performed the surgery, and that led to her death. And so there was a recovery. But it was limited because of some of the laws, of medical malpractice in this state, and in many states have the same laws.
Sure. Today we have with us Dolores, Evangeline's daughter, and she's going to join us right now. It's my great pleasure to introduce Dolores, Evangeline's daughter, to the show. Welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks for spending time with us, by the way.
It's been awesome.
When you first learned that your mother basically died at the hands of an incompetent doctor, what was your immediate thoughts?
I was outraged. I was devastated. My mother, who I thought would be here forever. My mom was the matriarch of my family. She was the nucleus. She kept everybody together. She kept everything together. And when I first learned of her death, I couldn't even imagine how anything was going to go forward.
How long did it take for you to find out the truth of what really had happened? Because the hospital probably lied to you, right?
Yeah. My mom was gone for almost over 2 years.
It took 2 years to find out?
Yes, my mom died in 2001.
Yeah.
And I found out in January of 2003. When it finally came out, it was like taking a wound and cutting it, ripping it up open again. Mm-hmm. And the worst part of it is that someone that is a professional, so-called professional, whom you put your trust in, came, sat down and spoke to you, and you're thinking that this person has your loved one's best interest at hand, because nobody wants to lose their mom. And to find out that that person deceived you, it's up until today, and it's 12 years later, there are times that it still doesn't settle well. When I see certain things happening, I miss my mom, and we can't go to her and tell her certain things. Her input is no longer there. He took something away from me that he could never replace. And the sad thing about it is the appalling part of it, because it's not sad, it's appalling that this man is yet allowed to continue to practice medicine. And no one has the pants to stand up and say, well, enough is enough.
Yeah. Marvin, this brings up a point that we talked about. You reported him to the Medical Review Board?
Department of Health of New York State.
And what have they done?
Well, they did nothing. We requested that they investigate because we felt that he perjured himself at trial based upon the testimony of other people who had been in that operating room who said there was a problem with this balloon moving and cutting off blood flow to Evangeline's brain. And we got a form letter basically back from the state saying they weren't interested.
Why do you think nothing's been done?
Well, I think the medical profession has a strong lobby in Albany in the state capitol, and I think that the Department of Health doesn't want to get involved with lawyers, especially. Right. But in this case, you know, we had a verdict. The people had spoken that he had committed malpractice. So I felt, you know, usually I'll tell clients that they won't get involved. But I felt, at least in this case, since we did have a jury verdict, and since there had been such conflicting testimony in that courtroom, that the state should get involved. And it was quite disheartening, and I know to the family as well.
Are you allowed to say who the doctor was?
Yeah, we had a verdict against Dr. Israel Jacobowitz. The jury spoke.
And he practices medicine right here in New York City?
In Brooklyn, yes. He's a cardiothoracic surgeon.
What's his name again?
Israel Jacobowitz. And he was found to have committed malpractice, and his malpractice to have caused the death of Evangeline Johnson by a jury. It's public. It's public record.
Are you allowed, you know, a lot of medical review boards, or, you know, part of the AMA, they protect the identities of doctors. In other words, their records. Have you found other cases where he has committed medical malpractice?
He was involved in another case that I settled.
Yeah, at the same hospital?
Yes.
For the same reason?
Hospital.
For the same reason?
Involving a similar surgery, not the same reason. In that case, a patient had developed fluid around her mitral valve, around her heart after the surgery, and it was never addressed, and it caused the heart to stop, and it caused her to become brain damaged. So significant cases that we're talking about.
Sure.
And there's been other cases.
Yeah. Dolores, if the doctor was here today, you're on national TV, what would you say to him?
I would say you took an oath as a medical profession, and your oath was to save lives. How can you have taken an oath, stood and taken an oath, and then your actions are totally contrary to what the oath was? My mother was not just a woman. She was just not another woman. She was an important part of many lives. Most of all, she was my mother. And you took something away from us, Dr. Jacobowitz. You took lives and you destroyed that could never be rebuilt again. And I think you should think twice with the oath that you took to stand behind it, because these are lives, people's lives, that you're destroying and walk away as if nothing happened. I remember the day you looked at me in court, and it was like no feeling, no nothing. I'll never forget that cold stare. But that was my mother. That was my mother, Dr. Jacobowitz. Was my mother.
Well, hopefully, with the broadcast of this show, people will start paying attention to that, and maybe he won't be practicing medicine anymore. Let's hope that, okay?
I hope so.
All right.
I hope so. Spare other people
Other
the
victims.
pain.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, and I want to thank you very much for appearing on this show.
And I want to thank you for giving my family the opportunity so that we can so that somebody else could know what has been buried under the dirt.
Yes. Well, thank you very much for sharing that.
Okay.
That message is going out to America. Thank you.
I appreciate it very much.
You're welcome. Marvin, your firm specializes a lot in medical malpractice cases. For people who are totally unfamiliar with what medical malpractice is, explain to them what it means.
Well, it means, the technical term is a departure from good and accepted medical care, but it means that during the course of a surgery, something went wrong because a doctor didn't plan properly, because a doctor didn't anticipate something, should have known, something was going to happen.
Yeah.
I mean, it runs the gamut. I mean, you go into a hospital these days, 1 out of 3 people get an infection because there's not proper infectious disease control. So there's a lot of manifestations of medical malpractice that people aren't even aware of.
What should a person do if they suspect they're a victim of medical malpractice?
Well, the first thing you should do is you have an absolute right to obtain your medical records.
Are they difficult to get?
They're not difficult to get, but you want to get them to preserve evidence. And you want to get them soon after the events, because unfortunately there are situations where either the records are doctored or they're lost.
Yeah.
I mean, I can't tell you how many times we are seeking records and they just don't exist because, you know, the powers that be, they know this is the smoking gun that they don't want in your hands.
You have probably a lot of cases of suspected medical malpractice that are brought to you. How do you evaluate a case and decide to take it?
Well, first of all, we get the medical records and we review them based upon our experience. But, and this is something people need to realize, we as lawyers have to sign an affidavit that we've consulted with a physician in this field, and based upon that we believe there's a meritorious case, an affidavit of merit. So you just can't run to the courthouse
and file a
sue.
suit.
Right, you know, this nonsense about all these frivolous lawsuits, they've all been filtered out of the system. You know, I can't affix my name to an affidavit and continue practicing law unless I've consulted with the doctor and I understand the specific issues of the medical negligence, of the carelessness, or whatever, you know, however it manifests itself.
Well, I want to thank you very much for being on this show. You did a great job for the family, and basically keep doing the work that you do, because we need you.
Thank you. It's my pleasure to be here too. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Thanks for joining us. You can get more information about our guest and the issues at insiderexclusive.com.